ปีครับเดี๋ยวจะฝากปีถ่ายแคปหน้าจอไว้ด้วยเป็นระยะนะครับ Hello, Professor.
Hey, Dhanuwad.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much for well, giving your time this evening, Thailand time, to give a special lecture to accept our invitation. Well, actually, just to let our audience know, Professor Ivan Berman and GSPA has long been collaborated, and in terms of academic and all sort of academic collaborations, researchers, special lectures, and it's been for a long while. And Professor Berman has already visited GSPA NIDA several times. Okay, now we have PhD, some of PhD students, current PhD students who just entered NIDA for maybe 1 or 2 years. Okay, so they perhaps haven't met you yet, but surely our senior graduates in PhD and some master degree have met Professor Berman already. So, well, it's been honored for, I think, for the GSPA NIDA once again, and for our PhD students to have you here with us this evening. So in this coming 1.5 hours, I'm sure that it will be a very valuable time, and surely our PhD students can learn a lot from your presentation, your special lecture today. And I have learned also that some of our students have particular interest in the comparative management research. So that will really inspire and enlighten them for further and deeper research experience. Okay, so tonight's special lecture will start in about a couple of minutes. So we might wait for maybe 1 or 2 more. Okay.
It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for making this possible while we wait to get started, Dhanuwad. May I invite the students to switch on their cameras, and maybe you can tell me how many are actually in the room?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So can all of us please turn on a camera? Okay, I'm sure that we have Ikra here. We have also Captain Satha, right? Captain Satha, who is a Thai Airways flight captain, is also here.
Well, thank you. Nice to meet you.
We have also
Thank you.
Ashish, you here? And we have some more. So could you please turn on your camera?
At least just to say hello.
Yeah, at least just to say
Hello.
hello.
Hello, everyone, and then I really thank you for inviting me. But I don't think I really can open my camera, but I remain all eyes and ears because I'm in my room right now at my house. So I don't think I look so presentable right now. So do pardon me, sir.
Okay.
Okay. Right.
So I can see that like this is a really nice small group, and the reason I'm inviting you to turn on your camera is so that we can actually have a conversation. If you have to listen to me for an hour
just give me 5 minutes. Then I'll just
you can talk. You're adults. People speak up, right? So if I can see what you're interested in, or you stick up your hand, right, then I can call on you, and you can make this a much more interesting Friday evening for you.
Definitely, I agree. So for those who just joined this special lecture, could you please turn on your camera just to say hello to Professor Ivan Berman just before we start? So I think we have a few more, okay, 3 or 4 more PhD students joining us. Okay, hello, Kun Pongpan, right?
Yes, Cup. Hello, Cup.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think we have few more on the list. Kun Nantida as well.
Dhanuwad, is there any chance to take a group photo of us?
Yeah, definitely คุณปีครับคุณปีช่วยถ่ายกรุ๊ปโฟโต้ให้หน่อยได้ไหมครับ So can everyone please turn on your camera? Thank you very much. That's really nice of you.
Let's go take a group photo.
And our staff will take a group photo. I will send you later.
Okay. This may be as good as we get it.
Okay, I think Kun Pi has already taken a group photo. Okay, so we also have like a couple of guests here. So
Oh, great.
yes, they might be interested in joining our PhD program later on. Okay, so we have Kun Talisa and yeah, can you introduce yourself or just say hi to us? Okay.
Hi. Hello.
Hi.
Okay. My name is Thalini Samkajan. I'm your student.
Oh,
Yeah. I'm already graduate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. You just graduated. Oh, great. Okay, so she just graduated, but of course, you are very welcome to this evening.
Thank you.
All right, so it's about time. It's 7 p.m. already, and thank you very much for all of you of PhD students for joining this evening special lecture. Okay, we are so honored to have Professor Ivan Berman here with us, who has long collaborated with GSPA NIDA. Well, he has supported us actually. We've been supported by him, really a lot, and I think he has helped us and especially our PhD program, okay, to be exposed more to international, academic conversation. All right, so this is a really great opportunity for all of you. I think the PhD program hasn't invited, the guest speaker, guest lecturer for 1 or 2 years already since we have a COVID-19 outbreak. So this is a really good chance for the current students and also our recent graduate, okay, to join us today. Well, Professor Berman, as I told you that he has supported GSPA NIDA a lot, and according to my understanding and my knowledge, he has a great, excellent academic achievement. So I think you should learn from him a lot. And to be honest, I have learned a lot from him too. Okay, so that I'm here with you today. So part of my, academic achievement, which is, still a long way to go, okay? But part of my academic achievement have been supported also by Professor Berman, okay? So I look at, and I was really, excited to see that now in terms of academic ranking and citation, Professor Berman is now #1 in Latin America, okay? In Latin America, he's currently in Brazil now, okay? Brazil and Thailand, okay? But because of technology, okay, we are, here all together. All right. So now we are gonna listen to a lecture from a professor who has more than 8,000 citations. Okay, more than 8,000 citations altogether with the H index of 42. All right. Which the H index of 42. So it's really, really, really high. So please all welcome Professor Ivan Berman from Department of Public Management, Sao Paulo School of Business Administration, Brazil.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much. It is really a great pleasure to be talking with you tonight. I have a special place in my heart for NIDA. I'll share you something more about myself soon, but let's just say I spent around 12, 13 years in Asia, and coming to NIDA, it's a two-way. I want to say I'm very grateful for the words but what makes this possible is a two-way conversation. I learned a lot from Thailand too. When I come to Thailand, I learn many important things. And the friendship of Danuwat and other people in the school is a memory that I will always have. And also, the current president of NIDA and the former president of NIDA and like so. Like you may wonder why I'm in Brazil. I'm not native Brazilian, but I'm married to a Brazilian. This is why. So that's why I'm here right now. And there's so much that I could say, but I think what I want to say on a smaller level is that actually there are many connections between Thai people and Brazilian people, but Thai people don't know Brazil and Brazil people don't know Thailand. Some go to the beach on vacation like so. Maybe fewer people from Thailand ever go to Brazil, but you've heard of football and carnival. There is a certain spirit between these two people. And in a more global world, we can begin to experience that. COVID has been terrible, but one silver lining is that our communications, the connection of Zoom or Microsoft Teams is far better now than it was at the beginning of COVID, right? The stability is there, the sound is much better, yes? So you're living in a time that you can actually explore more easily with other people. It's not only that you have access, there's more on the internet, you can learn more from about other countries, other programs going online often. Often what people have to share in government about a program actually is online in some countries. Some countries don't report very well, but other countries do. There is variation that way. Like I lived in New Zealand and in Taiwan, and I can tell you that what they put on the website there, if you can deal with the language barrier of Chinese right, it's there, right? It's not like people are hiding, right? It's not like you have to know people for 10 years before they talk with you. And if you send them a message and reach out and say, I'm interested in studying this, I'd like to go, do you have 20 minutes or 30 minutes for a Zoom call with me? They will say yes. This was not the case 10 years ago. It may not even have been so much the case pre-COVID, although it was started. Science has always been a very global enterprise, right? And so even more so to today. So I'm just encouraging. So like what I'm doing here today, it should be part of a two-way conversation. I hope you will contribute something. In fact, I'm going to, almost require that you say something at the end, right? It cannot be a one-way street. Friendship is a two-way street. And I know I will come to Bangkok one day again, or even if I didn't come to Bangkok, if we have a topic in common, you can always reach out to me. We can schedule a conversation like this. What is the difference, I tell people, between having this conversation now between Bangkok and Sao Paulo, or in Bangkok with somebody who is 1 kilometer away, but it's not convenient to meet that person because you have Bangkok traffic jam? What is the difference? What is the difference? Apart from the time zone difference, what is the difference? Okay? So, we're living in a particular time. Let me get started. Again, as I talk, I encourage you sticking up your hand. I will, and I'll stop. It's a two-way conversation. I know the culture in Asia can be very formal. I encourage you to break it down. Anyway, this is your Friday evening. I'm here for your entertainment and to make your Friday night a better night. Okay? So let me get started. Can everybody hear me well, by the way? I just want to do a sound check. Sound check okay? Sound check okay, very good. Okay. So I'm really interested in what you're doing, what you're studying. The PhD is a journey. You're not a master's student. You'll be here for several years. It's a journey of contributing to knowledge, making new knowledge. We share that in common. You may be asking what you have in common with this professor who you never saw and who's talking to you from halfway around the world. What we may have in common is a common interest in your topic. And I have many, many interests, so there's a high probability that we might have something in common. And don't be so formal that you think, oh, I can only talk to my PhD advisor, No, you crowdsource your information. You talk to many people. The bigger your network, the happier you will be, the easier everything will be, and it'll be more enjoyable for everybody, okay? Okay, it's a modern time, okay? Modern times, okay. Let me share my screen with my PowerPoint. Okay, let's see here. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint and see me?
Yes, I can see your screen now. So maybe you can do the slideshow.
Oops. I don't use Microsoft Teams too much. We often use Zoom more commonly. So the only thing is here, I want to see me too as I'm talking, you too. So I'm trying to. There we go. Okay. Oh, come on.
Okay, we can see it now.
You can see. Let me do it like so. If I maximize my screen, then I lose the other. Then I lose the video of you. So is this okay?
Yes.
Well, actually, just a question. What is it that you actually see? Do you see the full PowerPoint, or do you see it in draft mode?
In draft mode now.
In draft mode, yeah. Just trying to see if I can maximize this, but I don't think so. Will this work for you?
I think it's okay, but if other students have difficulties, please let us know. But for now, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's quiet.
It's fine. Okay.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, very good. Okay, so but this way I can also see your videos too. So Dunawat asked me to talk about comparative research in public management or public policy today, and how we understand that has really changed a lot in the 10 years, and it's for your advantage. I'll make most of my points at the beginning. So this is not like a detective book or a movie where you have to wait until the end to get the conclusion. Okay, I'm going to give you the conclusion up front in the beginning and then unpackage it, okay? So that you can focus on that. So, Dunawat already said a few things. I do think it's important that you know a few things about me. I was actually raised in Holland. I was born in America, but I have a Dutch stepfather. So I spent all my childhood, all the way through my master's in Holland. And then I came to America to get my PhD. A lot of people from around the world go to America to get their PhD. The only difference was I had an American passport, but I was a stranger in American culture, right? Because I grew up abroad. To my great surprise, I made a whole career in America. I started as assistant professor and ended up as a distinguished professor at Louisiana State University, which is one of the major universities in America. And I started that job actually in 2004, but in 2005 was a major hurricane in New Orleans, Hurricane Katrina. That was the first time the world had such a big hurricane, and we had a house there myself. And then I got a call from somebody who said, listen, Berman, I understand you're in New Orleans. How would you like to spend a couple of weeks in Korea? At least they don't have hurricanes there. I said, good. So me and my wife got on a plane, went to Korea. And then 3 years later, I went very often to Korea. I met other people from Thailand. Like, it's Asia, the global world, but I grew up in Europe and America. No, I didn't know. Anyway, so I got a job offer in Taiwan to be international PhD director at the National Chengchi University, which is Taiwan's major social sciences university. And I was there for about 6 years. And then I had an opportunity to go to New Zealand to be international director of internationalization there. And I did that so I could continue to work with Asia. But I used my time in Taiwan and New Zealand to study public management in Asia, because I think that there's a lot going on in Asia. A quarter or a third, whatever, of the population of the world lives in Asia. But we were not getting enough information out of Asia. There were not enough people in Asia doing research on Asia in ways that the rest of the world could understand or would appreciate. So my focus for about the 12 or so years that I've been in Asia was in the export mode. I wanted to know what is happening in Thailand or Nepal or wherever you come from that people in Germany, France, or maybe Brazil or America would want to know about. Because of global sharing, no? You've taken a lot from the world, but you have to give back to the world too, right? Surely you are doing interesting things, and I will show you that you are doing interesting things. So that's what I want to know, what what you would like you to know about me. The rest is on this slide. As part of my journey in Asia, spending time in Bangkok was really important. But I continue to work with a lot of people. I'm appointed as a adjunct chair professor at Fudan University in Shanghai. I'm appointed as an adjunct professor at University of Indonesia in Jakarta. I had a temporary appointment at NIDA at one point, like so. If you have any questions, just stick up your hand. And I also did like three books on public administration in Southeast Asia. They're now like 10 years old, but it was the first stream. It was like, what's going on? So this was like baseline. So is there anything different about that? Okay. Now, so that's my background. So I really spent a lot of time in Asia. I continue to work with people in Asia. And as soon as COVID is over, you will see me in Bangkok, hopefully. That's the plan. So there's a question, how do you do comparative public administration policy? About 10 or 15 years ago, there were two famous articles, and people were trying to figure it out. If you go back 25 years ago, you're beginning at the internet, people doing more global travel, and there's this interest of, can we learn from others? Public administration, public policy tend to be low national efforts. Maybe not public policy, but certainly public management, because, oh, we got national rules, national regulations, But we want to know how other people do it. So we get an interest, and I was in the first or second generation of that interest. And at this time, 10 or 15 years ago, if you ask what is comparative public administration, here would be a definition. Pollitt, he recently passed away, but this is only 10 years old. Huh? He would say, well, it's a loose, multidisciplinary collection that uses political science, law, business studies, organization theory. So something we use different bodies of knowledge very vaguely, but there's no content to what he's saying. It's like, really, this is very messy, right? What is this? And then another person said comparative public administration is defined as the study of administrative systems in a comparative way. So you would look at how things are organized, say Thailand or India or Malaysia, Indonesia, America, and you would compare that in some way, and you would try to get you would try to get some knowledge from that. But I want you to point out that 10, 15 years ago, it was not a body of knowledge. So like if you're a doctor, you say, what do we know about the human body? Oh, I know this. But when it came to this particular concept, people didn't have it that way. They said it's a verb. It's about how to compare. Use all these different knowledge to compare. It's very messy. Okay? So this is very pre-embryonic of a development, right? But okay, this is where society, where humanity was. We're just beginning to open up. And it takes some time to figure out where it was. Okay, but today it's a little bit different. Okay, so I've spent time in Asia. I was raised in Holland. I did 20 years in America. I'm married to a Brazilian. I have a brother who lives in Spain. Like so. And I want to give you some of my conclusions about how I would teach it today, and perhaps give you more guidelines. But I'll give you some conclusions first, and we can test about that. There may be some radical thoughts that come from somebody who's really studied this, been books on it and all that kind of stuff. The first thing I'd like to suggest to you that as a starting point, it may not be absolutely true, but as a starting point, I would say that all countries are basically the same until proven otherwise. You may find them differences, but are those differences relevant? Now, by coincidence, you're talking to somebody who's at his 6th university, and 4 of them have been in a business school. If you talk to people who study businesses, you cannot study businesses if you think they are all fundamentally different. Of course, there are some businesses with different cultures, and we know there are differences, right? But can't you make a study of businesses in the electronics industry? A study of businesses that do graphic design? Artificial intelligence? Of course you can, correct? Who would say that you cannot compare companies that do artificial intelligence? That would be silly, correct? At this point, you need to nod your head. Say, yes, yes, yes. Okay, very good, very good. Okay. So I'm going to suggest to you that in this way, all countries are basically fundamentally the same. And they are. They all have a Ministry of Education. They all have national defense. They all have a tax collection agency. They all have a department, Ministry of Health. You have to admit that that's a lot of similarities, no? So I'm going to suggest to you that they are basically the same. Now, I know, for example, I work in China, I work in Taiwan, I will show you some work from Vietnam, so you have communist countries that don't have elections. I get it. But in the area of public administration, in what way is having elections important? Until you can tell me that the fact that there are elections changes the nature of how public management is done, then there's a difference. But you have to make the point. This is where we stand today. Maybe in 10 years from now, we will know how those differences are important. But many people have looked at such differences and say, well, countries are different in all the ways that are not important to public management and producing programs for the people. This would be a radical, an outrageous thought 20 years ago, what I'm telling you. But today, knowledge advances, and people who have worked and lived, like the people who work at the Asian Development Bank or World Bank, right now I'm doing a project with the Inter-American Development Bank, people who have that kind of experience, they will tell you. And the actors are different, but how you do technology in one country may not be different how you do technology in another country. So this is something very fundamental. We can compare. This means that we can compare. Until you tell me that you cannot compare this kind of apple with that kind of apple, but we're comparing apples and apples. They just happen to be different apples, but they're not apples and oranges, or apples and bananas, or apples and durian. Okay? Number two, there is global convergence. There's so much learning from each other. What countries want to do, how they want to use technology, how they want to do leadership development, how they want to do their budgeting. There is convergence. There is not an Asian style of public management that is different from a North American style of public management that is different from a European style of public management. There are differences, of course, but are those differences even important? Everybody wants to do certain things in certain ways. So the journals, the academic journals and the research that you will do that might end up in an academic journal one day come from many, many different countries right now. I once did an article on South Korean creativity management, a kind of public performance management called creativity management. It was in the early 1990s. And it's sent out to blind reviewers, and we get comments back in the article. This is really an important article. It talks about an important practice. It could be useful for so many different places. However, because it's a Korean case study, we think you should publish this in a Korean journal. Those were the attitudes 30 years ago. If you were in Thailand doing something on Bangkok or wherever, you might get that comment too. But today, nobody would say that anymore. It doesn't matter if it comes from Bangkok or from Seoul or from North Dakota. We're looking at the practices. We're looking at how they can be adapted and what we can learn. To say that you could not learn would be the same notion of saying, well, we're going to take an experiment, not a sample of blood regarding COVID from people in Thailand. And somebody would say in Russia or South Africa, oh, that sample is not relevant to us because these are Thai people. They're not South African people. What kind of nonsense is that? If there are any differences, tell us what they are. But if you cannot point to differences that are materially significant to your subject matter at hand, then the default assumption today should be that there is no difference. Until proven otherwise, there is no difference. Okay, so there is a diffusion, but some countries are, or some organizations or some cities are ahead of others. 20 years ago, you didn't want to say that, but path dependency, which is called in science, is now widely accepted. And we also know what causes some countries to be more ahead of others. We've had those studies now over the last 20 years. What has contributed to those too. We know that leadership matters. We know that capability matters. We know that resources matters. So we can explain why some countries are ahead and others are still behind. But the fact that we're all such, trying to do similar kind of things mean that we can learn from others' experiences. We can compare and we can learn. Because of these assumptions, it's very important to understand these assumptions because they fly against still some common sense that you might see in the newspapers. We think, oh, Thai politics is so different from other politics, But when it comes to public management, maybe politics is not always so important. Finally, geography and conditions do matter. No question about that. If you're in Bangladesh, you have a lot of flooding. If you're in Thailand, you have certain issues. If you're in Brazil, you have other kinds of issues. And because different places have different issues, they have to deal with their problems. So if you have a place that can learn a lot, has good leadership, good capabilities, they will probably invent solutions that fit for them. But you could learn from those solutions because they might be relevant for you too in some way. But you do have to adapt them to the context of a country. The fact that you have to adapt it to the context doesn't mean it cannot be done, right? Companies learn and steal from each other all the time. Why would you bother learning from another company, if you cannot apply it in your own? You have, of course, different people, different systems. We have to adapt the technology. I get that, okay? You overcome the barriers. And other countries are doing. So because people do have different experiences, but they are contextualized, learning and innovation matter a lot. If you have a country, if you have a ministry that cannot learn from others, cannot learn from its own mistakes, let alone learn from others, then it is destined to be narrow and just focus on itself. But if you could learn from others, you might have a different mentality. And by the way, this generation would definitely welcome such a ministry. People do not want to work in places where they cannot be creative and do new things and make a real difference, right? Older assumptions about people going to work for one company or one government and staying there for their whole career, I don't think this generation is going to do that. By the way, and you can look at other countries and come to that conclusion. Do you realize, just as a sidebar, that in US American Master of Public Administration program, less than half of the students work for government or want to work for government? About 20% of those students want to work for-profit business, because for-profit business provides a lot of solutions for government, and companies need people who know how to work with government. They make a career out of providing solutions about, say, sort of healthcare, maternity, economic development, whatever their particular public affairs niches, right? Just right now, just last week, I got a message from Indonesia saying that they're looking for a new paradigm in companies, how companies can increase public value. Of course, they make a profit. But this is, yeah, okay. And I'm talking long about these particular points. And I just want to keep it, I have way too many slides. But if you wanted to say or contribute anything, please do. But this is one of my main conclusions from somebody who studied it. I said I would give you my conclusions up front, not at the end. This has fundamental implications for doing public management and for making comparison. You don't get locked down thinking, oh, if I compare Thailand to, say, Vietnam, oh, that's going to be a different system, blah, blah, blah. Prove that the system, focus on the problem. What is the problem, the goal that your program or policy is trying to address? Then determine whether or not having a communist country is relevant or not. Okay? Okay. So, okay, well, anyway, so when you make comparisons, go very broad or very narrow. About 20 to 10 years ago, people were doing very broad comparisons to find out, is there anything Asian about public administration? I was one of those people. So here are some general books. Some of them are from me. This is recently a handbook on public administration in Latin America. So there are these broad books. Some of them may now be 10 years old. But when you read that, you have to say, well, if the reason, Evan, you were looking at public administration in East Asia to find something significant about it, you failed, because the conclusion of all these books, when you read all of them, is that there's not much difference. The civil service system is the same in most countries. There are points of distinction, but do they matter for having more productive or effective civil servants? And either we don't know, or what we know says it doesn't. It's very quick to get to practices that would be effective. And that's been a main learning point. So people are no longer looking at broad comparisons across countries in comparative public management. We don't need to do that anymore. We did that and we learned from it. P.S. In those 3 books that I did are 78 chapters about different aspects of public management, public policy, ethics and corruption, use of digital technologies across many countries in Asia. 78 chapters. So it should be available at the library at NIDA online or something like so. So this is old school. You don't need to do this. If you did this, you would come to the conclusion that all countries are basically the same. So why can I be so comfortable, so radical, saying all countries are the same? Because I've been there. There have been a small group of people in the world who've done this. By the way, you're not talking about many people, but you're talking about maybe 50 people in the world who are interested in such things. Most people just prefer to sit in their own countries, more comfortable, no? Okay. So what I wanted to do tonight was talk about 3 things in comparative public management. What do you compare? Why do you compare? And I already gave you, the learning answer to that. And then how do you compare? And my conclusion is that in this moment, you are very fortunate and both unlucky and then lucky. So lucky, unlucky, lucky. Every generation should be a little bit like that, right? You are lucky in that you can compare almost anything. I'll show to you, as long as you focus on specific programs, specific things, a specific problem, you could study, you could compare anything. There are no limitations. Substantively, there are no limitations, and that's fantastic for you. So whatever is your interest, you could compare if you wanted to. That's number 1. The unlucky part is that because so much can be done, there is not a magic formula. You have to sort of muddle through what is important, what can be compared, why am I comparing? In each particular problem, you'll have to work that through on your own. It is not possible to give a standard formula for an endeavor where anything can be compared, correct? The answer must be broad as well. So although there's not a magic formula that one can give you for this is how you do comparative public management, the good news then, the lucky news is you just use the techniques from your research methods that you learn. You can do case studies across countries to learn. You can do surveys across countries to learn. You can do experiments across countries. All those tools you can learn. You just need to choose what tool you already have and see the benefit of comparing. Why do we compare? And so I'll give you the answer now, and then I'll have some slides to prove the point. You can compare. It used to be that people would compare to have interesting contrasts. Let me contrast this with that because they're so very different. But today, that's not the case, and it also don't make much sense in a world where you have 190 countries, and I just said they're all basically the same. What you get then from, you can compare, if you will, to have greater generalizability. So if I take a case from Bangkok and I compare it with a case from Kuala Lumpur, guess what? They're very similar. So looking at similar cases can increase generalization. And standards of knowledge always go up. It used to be that one case would be enough. But if you're an article producing knowledge, isn't it better to have examples from 3 different cases? Is more knowledge? So fundamentally, where it's easier to access information, why only a survey in one organization if you can do it in 3 organizations? And if you do it in 3 different organizations, you might find that there are some conditions that vary, and you might come to the conclusion, guess what? It doesn't matter. Well, that is fantastic news. That means that what you're saying is applicable across a broad range of conditions. Correct? So it's just about doing more effort to get more certain, because you're in the knowledge business. If you have the PhD program, you produce knowledge, and the more valid your knowledge is, the better it is, correct? I mean, come on. If you're taking a vaccine, do you want to know whether it works for 200 people in one country or that it works in 20,000 people in 30 different countries? Right? What knowledge is better? when it was difficult to get information, maybe 20 years ago, you could only do it in one place. But today it's not. If you have the networks and you reach out to people, maybe you can get knowledge, right? Standards go up in the world. And this is one of the ways that internet is creating new standards for science. You can get more information. You can do that. So I'll show you pieces of my work. I now work with people in almost every continent. And it's not because they're different, but we're making the case that this particular kind of practice works in a very broad range of settings. That's one. Two, sometimes you do have interesting contrasts. And you can use the contrast to see if the contrasting difference is the reason why you're different outcomes. You don't see too much of that, but that can be done, as well. Maybe some setting has a very entrepreneurial leader or a good budgeting system or good technology. Another one is behind the technology and how does that affect different things. One can study it in that way too. So I'm just saying that we're not always only doing comparative just for looking for differences. Maybe we're doing it for similarities. But that shows that this approach is very robust, very robust. Okay. There are other things I could say, well, that'll come up. So a brief overview of the historically comparative public management has looked at different kind of phenomena, and the emphasis today is on policies and programs. But some of the past still lingers on. So the past doesn't really end totally. But anyway, in the 1930s, there was a lot of comparisons asking the question, what kind of government system is better? Is it better to have a democracy or communism? And remember, World War II was fought over that, right? Do you want democracy or a fascist system? And many people thought fascism was better. So that's what people were studying. And I just want to say that although that's not the focus of, if you want to publish in top journals today, that wouldn't be the top. It's also very philosophical. We have better methods today than 100 years ago. The question is not totally irrelevant, like in Afghanistan or in Iraq. The question does come up. By the way, Thailand, I won't step into that, but Thailand is a fantastic case for the world, where you've gone through all these different constitutions and different forms of regimes and like so. And you can actually see what difference does it make. Does it matter? How much does it matter? And what way does it matter to public management to have one regime or the other? That would be a very important contribution to knowledge right now in the world. Maybe it's too sensitive for people in Thailand to tackle, and I appreciate that. But for somebody else looking outside of Thailand, you say, oh, Thailand is a fascinating case where you have all these transitions and it's not too bloody. Right? So I think so, but very often people in the country don't see it. They don't see how what they are experiencing actually really could be a very important contribution to human knowledge on important questions of our days. And so one of the challenges I will say is actually to find your topic. And I'll talk about that in just a second. But my point is that because something was done in the past doesn't mean that the concern is totally irrelevant for today. Most articles would not talk about this, but you can still talk about it where it's relevant. It still continues some way. In the 1960s, the focus of comparative public administration focused on developing institutions and development. This is a little bit post-World War II imperialism, colonialism, or post-colonialism, where you have a lot of countries becoming newly independent. Of course, that wasn't the case for Thailand, but in your region, you have several of those cases, of course, Indonesia being one, of course. Africa, full of Africa, right, and South America, right? A lot of colonial powers have been left, and these countries needed to build themselves up. And theories were developed about how to build institutions for development, and how to build that. So one of the theoretical concepts out of the 1930s was pot score. Many of you are familiar with that. It deals with the question of 1930s, what should managers be doing? And the answer is managers should be planning, organizing, directing or leading, staffing or human resource management, coordinating, reporting or evaluation, and budgeting or budgeting and finance. That idea that came out of other areas of public administration in the 1930s continued to be relevant today. It's still the basis of your public administration curriculum at master's level, but also in business schools. Because what do we teach people around the world? Business or public administration? Planning becomes strategic planning, right? Organization, we don't teach enough. We probably need to, but it's coming back. We need to design new structures, right? For cross-cutting collaboration. We are still interested in design issues. Directing becomes leadership. Leadership is a huge course, huge research area. How should public leaders do? Staffing is human resource management, and so on and so forth, right? The only thing that is missing here is information technology, because they didn't have that in the 1930s. So anyway, a lot of this stuff out of the 1930 was applied in 1960s, how to do that. But many of these practices were very normative, and it didn't always work out very well. Mainly, we think because of a variety of impacts, but one was politics. It doesn't include politics, and politics really affected the development of many countries in South America and Africa. The political leadership, you want democracy, but it's not really stable. And what is the quality of your leaders, and what do they want, and all those kinds of issues. Regime change, very problematic for continuity. It takes decades to build up strong public institutions, right? And the political system doesn't support that very well. It has a lot of dynamics, changes a lot. I think that was one. The other thing that it doesn't deal with is capacity. The irony probably is that developing countries have more problems than developed countries, but they have fewer people and capacity to deal with them. So you're creating institutions with these structures, but you don't have the capacity of the people, the capacity of the technology, the capacity of the infrastructure to actually deliver the services. So it looks like you have a competent organization, but in fact, it doesn't produce. It's like having a car where the brakes, not quite good, 4 tires, and this car only has 3 tires. Engine, well, we took that from my grandmother's car, It may look like a car, but it doesn't really work as well. And that was a lesson at that period. What they're learning from it? Today, I think so. If you look at the work of these big banks, like Asian Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, there's a lot of capacity building. So, but I leave to you whether we're learning lessons or not. Anyway, today it's a lot about policies and programs. You look at the functional areas. Say we don't look at the building, the institution anymore. Now we're focusing on health policies. So a specific kind of health policy. What is the practice for addressing this kind of condition? We're delivering services to rural communities, or how do we develop leaders for public agencies? How do we deal with indigenous populations? How do we use certain performance management practices or innovation in our agencies to make them more dynamic? We are looking at specific programs or policies, how we can solve a particular problems. But as I just said, so this question is not totally dead. The issue of how to make institutions work is not totally dead. But I would say 80% or 90% of the work focuses on this latter area. So that's what gets published in the journals and what you'd probably be doing your dissertation on, I imagine, right? Some specific area. So if you look at it for our time, comparative kind of topic for our time, what would you be looking at? So you might ask me, how do countries or different successfully privatize government functions, if that's what's going on? Or you might study a particular instance of a privatization. You do have to contribute to new knowledge, but if you were just a master's student writing a term paper like so, you might look at this, right? Or how do countries successfully address corruption? Corruption is as old as people, right? So this is an ongoing concern for humanity. So how do countries or departments increase the quality and responsiveness of services? Why are some countries more responsive than others? Well, I'll be happy to make my slides available to you later. So Danuat has a PDF, you can share that. What functions do different governments provide? How are senior officials selected in different countries? Leadership matters. That's not a new. So you're at a very interesting point where we actually know a lot. We know a lot about the basics, and your job is to know what we know. Decide for your own self, what do we know, what don't we know, and what would be a good addition to knowledge for the world. But that's the other thing. You're not just producing. You may be able to get a PhD degree by just applying a particular standard, but the higher standard is to have PhD students who actually produce new knowledge for the entire world. Right? Because why would you only produce knowledge for Thailand if in fact that knowledge could be valid for the whole world? Right? I mean, what is so special about Thailand? What problem does Thailand have that 50 other countries don't have? Tell me this, okay? And that's the good news. Everybody thinks their country is special, but that's maybe because they haven't looked at other countries deeply enough.
Can we, excuse me, Professor, can we say in a sense that maybe Thailand and few other developing countries has a similar problems, like say we are in the middle income trap?
Yeah, yeah. And you can study what are some efforts to overcome middle income trap in particular areas, right? Right. Totally, totally. And once you understand that, and you find other countries relevant, then you say, well, let me work with this scholar. Let me work with that scholar too, who has the same interest. Let's do a project that looks at what Thailand is, different kinds of ways of doing it. Because in Thailand, you'll only maybe find 2 or 3 ways of, I don't know, 10 different ways of overcoming income trap. But if you look at other countries, they may have somewhat different approaches. Some similar, some different. Absolutely correct. Benoit, do you have a follow-up on that?
Yep. But maybe if other students have any reflections, please share with us if you want to ask or respond to Professor Berman's issues. I mean, or maybe if you have like particular issue from your country, like ICRA, you might have something you can ask Professor Berman.
Totally. Don't be shy. This is your time, right? I'm not here for me, I'm here for you. So get your money's worth out of your time by asking a question that's on your mind, right? Don't be shy. Okay. There are some differences. I don't want to go deeply over this, but I ask people, how many governments do you think there are in North America, in America? People say 1, American government. Say, well, think again, how about cities and counties? Oh yeah, got those 2. When you actually look at the census, which is not a secret, right? It's published on the public website, okay? It turns out that America thinks that they have 90,000 different government units, 90,000. Some are cities, some are smaller towns, some are counties, but some of them are school districts, and some of them but most of them are called special districts. In America, you don't only have general government like a city, but next to the city, a part in the same jurisdiction might be a separate single-purpose agency that just does a highway, or just provides fire protection, or just provides sewer, or just provides housing, or just water supply. And those are taxed separately. These are public agencies that just do water supply, or just do sewer, or just do the cemeteries, or just do the hospitals. Americans love their governments. One of the ironies, I think, that has not been well enough spoken about is that many developing countries, they complain about their government, but in reality, they don't have enough of it. Their government is not big enough for all the problems they want to tackle, or they make a general purpose government so big that it becomes unmanageable. If you look at other countries like the British or the Americans and so on, they create many, many different governments with a single purpose so that you can manage it just for that purpose. So that's interesting, right? And so you see this in the open mind a little bit. Oh, if we're tackling that problem, who should be tackling it? Does it need to be part of the city, the ministry, or could we create a new entity that just does that, maybe temporarily even? Because it could be better managed. Why are companies so successful? It's a good question. How many products do you think Apple has? Oh, maybe a couple hundred maximum, right? How many programs, which might be the similarity to a product in the private sector, so how many major programs do you think a national government runs? By gosh, nobody has even counted that. There's some budget estimates, but the budgets often aggregate these things. My guess is that most governments operate about anywhere between 4,000 to 15,000 programs. Well, and when you walk into these national government offices, you realize there are just 30 people who are working for one program for the entire country. They're totally understaffed. Apple or Microsoft would never be successful if they just had the 30 people, even 300 people on one product. You start to get these insights when you look abroad and asking these very basic questions. By the way, this is a tax bill from an example from any American. When Americans pay their taxes on their home every year, it's split out where the tax is going to. Some of your taxes go to the library, some of them go to park recreation, some of them go to police, some to fire operators, some to general things, some to the zoo, some to veterans. It's all specified here. This is how these services get paid. Americans have a lot of government, and they love it. So it's interesting. You listen to this rhetoric out of America, right? These politicians say, we want less government. Only Americans can talk about wanting less government because they already have so much of it. You start to go deeper, you start to find the real truth. Because the real truth is not always on. I'm not going to say that CNN doesn't tell you the truth, but it doesn't tell you other parts of the stories that you are interested in. Here are some examples of past student paper topics. These come from master level students, but the focus is on policies and programs. So take a minute to read some of these. And you will see that they are focused indeed on specific policies or specific problems that are being solved, right? So for example, how are doctors certified? How are doctors licensed? How do they do that in Canada, United Kingdom, and New Zealand? Or a comparison of government approaches to promotions of strategic industries in Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea. Or providing antiretroviral treatment in Angola, Botswana, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. Maybe the student come from there, no? But you can see that these are all very important problems of our time. I mean, it may not be relevant for your interest, and that's cool, okay? No problem, right? But find something that is relevant, right? For somebody, this was relevant. There are thousands of problems out there. If government run, say, 4,000 to 15,000 programs, each of those programs is important for somebody, right? The other conclusion is that most of what gets studied is probably not relevant, not of interest to you. But if you look broader and you start to see the similarities between problems, you can start to learn from studying other problems. Yes, Ikra.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your time. And I just want to ask one question. Like whenever we have to make comparison or we are going to conduct a study, so should the comparison be grounded on some common thing? Like we should need to consider the culture or some common value. Like if I am going to compare Pakistan with America, so there should be some common factor between the country with whom I am comparing, or it could be like randomly. What's your suggestion?
I didn't get the last point about random. I got everything until you said randomly. Tell me the last sentence again. I just want to be sure that I understand your thinking correctly.
Yeah,
by the way, I have friends in Pakistan. So if you're from Pakistan?
Yes, I'm from Pakistan.
Very good. I've been to Lahore. I have friends in Lahore and Lums and the University of Punjab. Some people who I love dearly. They're very, very good people there.
Thank you. So I'm asking that if we are going to conduct a study, like we are going to compare 2 countries or 3 countries, so there should be some common point between those countries?
Yes, the common point is the problem. You don't compare the country. You compare the problem. Let me go back to this slide. You don't compare the government system or the country. You compare a specific policy and a specific problem. That is what they have in common. They're united. What they have in common is they're trying to solve a particular problem. Our job is to make the world a little bit better, no? So what area are you looking to make the world a little bit better? That is what they have in common. Whether or not the values matter or the laws matter or the culture matters is an open question. You might find that there are differences that don't matter. Right?
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. And you might find what does matter is, for example, resourcing, or maybe the security situation, or things of that nature, or the fact that America has so many universities since World War II that on every city there's a university with a master public administration program, so they can hire people, capacity, right? Capacity. They can hire people with a master of public management. That's very easy in America. How easy is that in Pakistan? I don't know. So these are the kind of differences that may matter when studying on a particular problem. So my answer is the commonality is the problem. Stick with that. Then everything else gets around that. Your question is super sharp. If you ask a question 20 years ago, some of you might say, oh, focus on the culture, this is where we're at, blah, blah, blah. Right now we're focused on the problem. And my happiness is always when I see a comparison between Pakistan, for example, and other countries like France or Germany. So actually, people in Pakistan are very creative, you know, and they're finding solutions that they haven't yet invented in Germany. But nobody talking about it, right? Who is researching this in the world, Ikra? Very, very few people. And if it's not published, not brought into the world, then it's like it doesn't exist. Right?
I was giving a PhD interview in some university in Italy. So
Okay.
I just made a research proposal, and it was about Pakistan and some other South Asian country. And they asked me a question like, what is so important in your country? Why should we be interested in the case study of Pakistan or some other country? So you need to focus maybe more on the Western countries or Europe. So there is nothing important in Pakistan. So they told me like this.
Well, thank you. This is where we are in the world, right? And so our job is to make the world a little bit better. And so, you know, I wish that in the moment we were all so bright to get the right answer, right? But you're like, I don't know what to say. We're you know, mouth full of teeth and nothing come out, right?
Yes.
And so you can only learn for the next time, right? That this comes up. And now you know that you need to have in your back pocket a list of things that Pakistan is really important to and contribute to the world. And oh, I did not. And then people would say, I did not know. And that's the truth.
Yes.
That's just how it is. And so my concern is that we don't have enough people who are prepared for that. Huh? And many countries are very bad at that because, you know, they just focus on their own thing, right? Okay. So I think it's very important to be an ambassador. But you got to walk careful at the border, right? You got to be a good ambassador for Pakistan, but not to confuse that with marketing and hype, right? You're a scientist, you must stick to the facts and not cross that border. Don't make Pakistan better than what it is. In fact, you should be very proud that Pakistan has many problems that it is addressing too. If you go back to one of my previous slides about if showing that Pakistan has a lot of learning and innovation, that is critical. Right?
Thank you.
So is that a helpful answer?
Yes, surely. Thank you.
And by the way, people in Thailand will have the same thing, no? They won't say, because the only thing that people know about Thailand is Phuket. From the Thai perspective, people know everything about Thailand that is not so important. So they have, right? What can I say, right? The job is of people in Thailand to present Thailand how it really is. Yes, we have beautiful beaches, but we also have this and this and this and this, and public management, this and this and this is what we're trying to deal with it. You got to change the story, right? Okay. So one of the issues that come up for PhD students is finding your topic. So what do you want to work on? I'm going to suggest that finding your topic is the most difficult thing. In my experience, about 30, 40, 50% of students in a PhD program will fail. And they will not get their PhD. But it's not because they're not bright enough. It's not because they don't know how to pass classes. It's because they've never found a topic. And then you sort of lose interest, and then life happens, and maybe you get a job offer. It's like, I didn't say that they did not complete their program and were unhappy about it, right? Or maybe they got a better opportunity, right? So I'm just saying that finding your topic is a main challenge of a PhD program that is very different from, say, undergraduate or master's, where you don't have that problem. Okay, so here's my suggestions for you from where we stand today, what I tell my students about what to do. First of all, I'm looking at the time too. Okay, so I have way too many slides. You need to bring me back, okay? So we can share the slides that I don't do, but then, you know, whatever, talk again. Anyway, so, but again, all the conclusions I'm going through right now up front, okay? So the first thing is, what is a hot issue in the world now and for at least the next 5 years? It takes time to do research. You want to have a problem that continues to be important for the future. So it does not help to look at articles of the past that dealt with past problems. You have to look in the head. You have to be a little bit in forecasting, right? What is a major issue that's going to continue to be important? So also when you finish it, you have something to talk about that people think is important. Okay? It's like being in I tell people it's like being in the fashion business. You have to predict what is a fashion going to be 1 or 2 years from now. And successful companies do that, by the way. So, okay, among those, all those, you can make a list of issues in the world, right? And you're not going to tell me that you cannot make a list of issues that are important in the world for the next 10 years, huh? Correct? Now, your job is only choosing one, okay? You can't solve the whole world. You always have programs and policies. I said 5 to 15,000 different programs are all important, right? So, among those, which are you interested in? So narrow the list down a little bit, right? Why are you interested in that? Maybe it's for your career. Your employer expects you to do that. Or maybe it's just intrinsic. I've always wanted to do this. I mean, that area is so passionate for me. And passion matters because doing research is a long journey. It's not something for 6 weeks. So I really think you need to be committed to it. Now, the basis for that commitment, I don't know. But you need to be committed to it. And then, by the way, it gives meaning to your life. So why not? People who have not committed to anything will have a problem finding meaning in their life, or they'll find it in something else. Maybe making a fan. I don't know what it is, right? Correct? To find meaning in something. Okay, then. Now, among those, especially a master's student, which you are not, how does it connect to public management? So maybe you have a problem that is important for the world that you're interested in, but there's just no connection to public management. You cannot, when you ask, what does that mean? I mean, how could government solve it? You say, no, cannot. If you cannot envision how government can solve it, then it's not a problem within the realm that we're dealing with here. Correct? Or maybe it's a problem that you think government should, and then you can develop some way of government maybe solving that. Anyway, it's got to be in the realm of public management, correct? Right. And if you're a PhD student, then it also must make an important contribution to knowledge in public management in significant ways. So if they say that this kind of problem, this would examine this particular way of working, or this particular kind of leadership that's not yet in the literature there, or this way of motivating people that's not, you have to bring something to the table. You're not going to get it from studying. You read past theories in order so that you know what not to do, because that has already been done. You need some creativity, right, to go beyond that. And that exists regardless of the problem. The problem might illustrate that. So when you look at this, it's clear that you might only end up with 2 or 3 things in the end that sort of meet all those criteria, right? And then you just choose one. And that's my suggestion for you to how to find a topic. Now, you may not start with the first one, right? You may start with the 4th bullet or with the 3rd bullet. I don't know, right? But I do know that in the end, life is, our mind is all over the place sometimes, right? But I do know that in the end, when the student has a good topic, it meets all those 4 criteria in some way. And if you don't know where to start, then let's start anywhere. And by the way, talk to your supervisor as soon as possible, because that person needs to obviously support you and can give you good input. You're not an island. Who's to say that you have all the knowledge about what is going to be hot in the world, right? Who says that you have all the knowledge about how it connects to public management? So you may want to develop some ideas, but then test it with others. See what you learn from their conversation. You get input, no? You're not an island, right? Yes, you have to take leadership, right, for initiating this process, but you get input along the way. A leader without subordinate is not going to have much to show for, no? Okay. So those are sort of the highlights. And if anybody wants to stop and ask a question, that is fantastic. After this, I just have a whole lot of slides that illustrate the point. But all the value that you're going to get from me, you've now had. Okay? It's a, if anybody wants to ask a question, or maybe you don't have a question, maybe you just have a thought. I mean, people should feel obligated to share what's on their mind. If you have any thought on your mind, I'd appreciate that you share it. I mean, I'm making my time available. Why don't you make your time, your thought available too, like the Ikra just did.
You can also type, okay, in the chat message, okay. If you come up with some questions or something you want to share with, okay, something you learn from this lecture, and you can type. We have a chat, chat channel, okay, and I can help read it, or feel free to say or to type. Is up to you.
Fantastic, yeah, good idea. I don't use Microsoft Teams very often, actually. Where's the chat function here?
Okay, so I think you are entering this room as a guest, so there is no chat. It's different.
I see. This is why.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Actually, I also prefer Zoom, but this is a standard application of NIDA. It's like a.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, it's a default platform, NIDA.
So you have to read that, because I won't see that, but I encourage you to chat. It's a requirement for the special lecture. Special requirement for special lecture is that you have that you use the chat, right? Dhanuad?
Yes, and if any one of you type some questions or something, I can read it out, to Professor Berman.
Cool. I like that. So I'm just going to say some more things, right? That elaborate, unpackage it, but I don't want you to get lost in the details. The highlight I gave you, okay? I made this slide about 10 years ago. People asked me, what are some global trends in public governance, like so? And I updated it recently, maybe a couple of months ago. And you can see how our topics are evolving, right? Things are not stagnant. There's not one body of knowledge forever and ever. We're constantly inventing this, right? Constantly inventing. And we're just participating at one point in time. What an academic can do is try to make some sense of our time, right? Give some definition to it that may help you. So, okay, so for many years now, we've been increasing local government and decentralization. A lot of articles in journals are about local government. There are very few people who work in major cities or like capital cities who can. Studying national government is not so easy. It's easier to study local government. You've got many more local governments than national governments, and national government is sometimes difficult to access to people, right? So people have been studying cities authorities, and that's in the literature for the last 20, 30 years, because this is what scholars could do. But for the last 5 years, I've been focusing on national government again, even though it's not easy. And because I think it's become increasingly important, evident in the world that if you want to have strong cities, you need strong national governments too to play their role. So I can see, especially in developing countries, a pattern going back to national government. And if you can contribute to that in some way, then you're making a huge contribution to global knowledge, because guess what? The American scholars, they cannot talk to people in Washington. And England is so secret, they don't even know who works in Whitehall. So if you have chance in Thailand or Pakistan, also difficult, but you're in Pakistan, some of the provinces have so much autonomy that you can learn a lot, and they almost act like a national government in some areas, right? So if you can study provincial government, that's as good as. You can explain why this is relevant to other situations. You've got to make the case, right? You've got to help the people to understand, but Pakistan is a bit different in that way, right? So I think you can still focus on issues of decentralization, how to get cities and authorities. Like the Americans have all these different special districts, right? They call it special district and special authority. But maybe that's still something to study in Thailand. Maybe some countries still need to develop their own authorities. Many countries could benefit from learning how to run authorities better. to deliver services better. Maybe that's a good topic for you. But think about the strategic role of national government is important too. There's been a lot of question in the last 10 years around democratization and post-democratization challenges, especially in the last 5 years. I think it's being very clear that democracies are not delivering as well. Again, it may go to the national level, not to the local level, by the way. But democracies are not delivering. Who said the system of democracy, by the way? Let's be honest, okay? That was invented in France like 300 years ago and put into practice in America 200 years ago. What is this fetish that people have with elections? Why do we want elections? And if you say we want elections because it creates accountability and you have less human rights abuses, then I probably agree with that, actually. But everything comes with a cost. So what is the cost of having elections in terms of good governance? Elections breed corruption. People need to be elected. It costs a lot of money. People may think it's their country only until you look at other countries. I'm in Brazil. Shall we talk about corruption? Right? So you see, so you don't look around and say, you know something, it's not only my country, my part of the world. This is not culture. This is, if everybody in the world is having this problem to some degree, maybe it's not culture, maybe it's a system, right? And so maybe a frontier challenge is thinking, how do we reform the system, right? I don't know if that's a problem that you want to take on, but by golly, it would be worth your time, no? I mean, it's making it, yourself dealing with real important issues of our time, not just wasting your time, right? This is the point, right? There are not many people who do this kind of work, so I think everybody is very precious. I don't want you to be studying the performance management of ants in Sahara, So what's he talking about? But I'm talking about the topics that one could do, technically show that you have the skills, but it's not going to make a big impact. So we're going from concern about democratization and post-democratization to actually beyond democracy as an institution. So who cares about democracy? We care about performance, individual rights, stability, security. These are the things that we care about. So how can we improve these specific issues? So you get from the system to the specific policy or program area, right? That's where the focus is right now. For 20 years, we were talking international learning, local application, or is it really a global village, that kind of thing. And so, you've all seen the slogan, think global, act global. What's coming out of that is that leadership of place is very important. And there's been some thought about 10 years ago, but it's probably time to revisit that again. So all these trends are going on in the world. As a scholar, you learn about that, but what is the capacity of places to bring it down, right? How do actually other countries or other cities learn about other cities in the world? They used to have sister cities. How well is that working, right? Seems to me the internet changing things. You continue to have specific problems in health, environment, public finance, education, intergenerational issues. Those continue to be important throughout the world. There's a diffusion of capability and expectation. The world is becoming more and more similar. There's so many differences, but there's also convergence, right? And something that's been vexing me for about 10 years is across the world, we see more universities. There's living standards are going up. Many things are better in the world today, right, than they were, say, 20 years ago. But at the same time, I'm seeing less excellence. I'm seeing more mediocrity. Or at least so it feels. Standards, on the one hand, there's a paradox. Standards in the world are going up, and standards are also going down. I find it hard to go beyond what I just said, but it seems to me a challenge worth thinking about, because you do need excellence. You do need institutions to be more excellent. Or maybe we're just getting to the point in the world that it's easier to build buildings than to find excellent people for it. I don't know. But there is something there, right? There is something there. And finally, we're talking about the management of values, the management of performance, no longer the lead task, or you must do this. Many developing countries, I think in Pakistan and Thailand and Brazil, you have the focus on detailed rules and regulations forever, blah, 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 blah. but it doesn't get the job done. Just create bureaucratic delay and headache. We need to move these outdated systems towards a more modern system. And I was just talking to somebody the last day, and we sort of agree that the legal profession, law, is the last frontier of modernization. A lot of countries suffer so much from their legal system. It's a legal system that is creating all these barriers and obstacles and not producing outcomes. So somehow a major frontier coming, right, is the reform of the law. How do you change a legal system? Whoa, right? Think about vested interest, but that is holding many countries back. You cannot, I don't think you can legitimately point to the problems of Indonesia, Pakistan, or Brazil to post-colonialism. They became independent and chose to continue with the law that they got from the colonial masters. And it was bad for the masters and it's bad for the pupil. Right? Danua.
Okay, there is one comment actually posted from our GSPA Facebook. Okay, there is one comment that has been asked. There is concern of citizen participation, and is it important for public management? Can you think as also a trend?
Citizens need to feel that their voice is heard. So citizen participation is one way to build trust with citizenry, and they should participate. It is their country. So the opportunity should be given. Now, the question is, when you have the mechanism of citizen participation, how well does it actually increase trust and give many people a sense that they are participating? And so I think you definitely don't want to do it away with it, but I also don't think I think it's probably not effective enough the way it's being worked. So again, the good challenge is how to improve citizen participation, but for what purpose, right? For what purpose? And in an era with digital communication, does it need to be in-person communication? But there have been efforts, and you know that Danua, to create e-governance, right? E-democracy, e-citizen input, and those have not worked out very well either. So, but maybe that was then, and this is now. Maybe post-COVID they work better. I don't know. Also, there's an issue with many people just not caring about what government does. And so, when you have 30% of people who don't care what government does, I don't want to deal with that. I'll let other people deal with that. I'll pay my tax. I don't want to deal with government. Then then e-participation may not work very well for them. So I think we need a more deeper understanding of that. I should say it's very important, and we need to do much better.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So why do we do CPA, comparative stuff? I've basically given you the answer to that. It increases knowledge, right? What different people do, we can learn from that. Improve the practices if you want to be practical. And also what I'll add to this now, in the more philosophical sense, we learn the scope and meaning of concepts. We started to ask, well, what is democracy? What is voting? What is the meaning of participation? You're starting to ask more fundamental questions that 20 years ago you might not challenge. Now you say, what is this really? Why do we have this? Everybody says this is good, but is it really good? What does it really mean? So it's an invitation for that, from which good things could come or maybe not. One does start the question, no? So I'll give you some examples of how comparative stuff can work. There was a book out a couple of years ago on how democracies die. And it gives many examples of different countries where democracies have died. So that's relevant, right? If all countries are the same and democracies can die, then maybe we should see how that happened in other countries in the past, so that we can see, oh, history doesn't exactly repeat itself, right? But as a famous person once said, it does rhyme. History rhymes, right? Not exactly the same, but it rhymes. So there's something there that is relevant for today, you can ask. Here's a more detailed study, and there's a journal of comparative policy analysis. So this is a journal that actually does comparative stuff. And an article that looks at disaster resilience and capacity in between Central Florida and Turkey. So comparing some responses in Central Florida, where they have a lot of hurricanes, and Turkey, where they have a lot of earthquakes. And so what is the differences in response system and which one works better and with the leadership? And you reach some conclusions about that, right? You can only reach conclusions, Ikra, because you're focused on the same problem. Because if you were focusing on culture or religion, you'd be up there, you could not make a comparison. It's harder to find places that are culturally more different than Florida and Turkey. Yet they have the same problem, or similar enough problem. Or you could say, well, earthquake is different from hurricane, but it's a management, right? How you organize for the response. That is now, you're talking, that's very, very similar. Organization, right? That you can compare. And when you start focusing on the organization, now you tell me how important culture is. Somewhat, right? Correct? Somewhat. Recently, right? All over the news, why compare? No. I don't have to tell you, but the practitioners are already comparing with a big issue. Do I need to say anything more about this? Maybe it's the academics that are behind. The world is already doing it. People like to think that academics are behind. Academia is an invitation for what is called thought leadership, right? Having some thoughts that give leadership, right? But that's not the same as saying that all academics are good thought leaders, or that academia on average is engaging in thought leadership. Some of the best ideas don't come from academia. Actually, what academics do is they take the ideas in the world and try to make sense of it, like I'm doing today, right? I'm trying to making sense of some phenomena for you as best as I can. I mean, that is, I think, what we do good. Whether that also produces creative solutions, that's another matter. Some of my best work, to be very honest, has been with senior practitioners in government. These were senior directors who themselves innovated and did things. And I then reported on that. I disseminated what, if I did not research their stuff, fewer people would know about it. So we are the big disseminators. If only we did better with the media. Sometimes they're big issues, sometimes small issues, like applying for civil service. How to deal with or what are the competencies that leaders should have, more detailed public management kind of areas. But you can see how different countries do, for example, How do you ensure that the leaders, senior civil servants have certain competencies or not? Human resource management is in some way, a little bit boring, but there are still aspects of it that are really central. So how to create better leaders continues to be a problem. About concepts. I was in New Zealand for about 6 years, and there they were developing their own definition of what different things meant, like resilience or sustainability. They took sustainability. This was one of the countries that were among the first to take sustainability out of environment and into other areas. They were thinking about resilience. What does resilience mean? How do you build a society or a particular area like infrastructure or health that is resilient? And they were starting to ask those questions. Now, New Zealand's interesting because it's in the middle of nowhere, but very strong ties to the British Commonwealth. So there's a lot of information, knowledge, global community between New Zealand, Australia, England, some of the other, South Africa. And it's like these consultants, these people, they literally get on a plane and go from one national government to another. And that's how it's very interesting to see that. I never was aware of that in America, because America is not part of the Commonwealth. They kicked out the Queen, right? So America has to do it all itself. But the British, it's just small countries. I mean, New Zealand, let me get this to you. It's geographically the size of England, with a population of 4.5 million. All of New Zealand fits into one district of Bangkok, spread out over the size of England, maybe over the size of Thailand. The size of Thailand, that's about the size of England, right? Geographically. It's similar, no?
Yes.
Good. So imagine Bangkapi, 4.5 million people. So okay, maybe 5 Bangkapis spread out all over Thailand, And that's the entire population of Thailand. And you're in the middle of nowhere. Your nearest neighbor is 10 hours flying. And then you still probably need to take another airplane. And these people, they come up with very magic. So they have this particular situation, and they come up with very creative solution. Because the British culture, for all its, and no culture is perfect, right? In the British culture in particular. But they're very analytical. And you see that in Pakistan. When I did a book on public management in Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan, for which I should get a Nobel, a Peace Prize, I think, by bringing those countries together in one book. But the people, what my surprise was how good the people in Pakistan are in terms of their thinking and their intellectual ability. It was, for me, that was a find that nobody knew how good people in Pakistan are. You have fantastic minds, you have fantastic education, not just the institution, but you create. It's something about, one of the positive things about British culture is that it's very analytically focused. People get very, very good mind, let me put it this way. You see that phenomena very strongly in New Zealand. So anyway, so thinking about these concepts, what is democracy? What is well-being? What is resilience? When you do comparative stuff, you get to put in a place, because maybe one country sees democracy different. After all, the Chinese, they talk about democracy. Now that'll become interesting, right? They have democracy without multi-party voting. What? This is good for the mind, right? Where it takes you to, I don't know. But as academic scholars, to open up the mind, you don't get that every day. You wish you could say that every day something happens to open up my mind, but that's not the truth. The truth is we treasure the moments that your mind opens a little bit. So some people can handle this, some not. Anyway, I know that I'm almost out of time, but I'm far from my slides. As a source online, OECD, they have an Observatory of Public Sector Innovation. This website is fantastic. They've been doing this for 20 years, and the number of cases that they have of innovations in the world. So as we said before, that some countries are more leading than others. I mean, if you want to know some of the most leading examples in the world from everywhere, the OECD, this is fantastic. So I really encourage this. By the way, United Nations can also help. ASEAN has something, ADB has something. So there are these, but there's something called peak organizations in the world, right, that collect information. The people that work there, their sole job is to know what goes on in other parts of the world and be a network facilitator. The people from those countries can load it up. So this is a place where this stuff comes. So it really makes life more easier. I'm not going to say that it be given to you on a silver plate, like your topic that you're interested in, that's high impact for you, that you're going to find it on the silver platter. You won't. But you can be certain that when you go to these kinds of websites, you're dealing with the best that the world has to offer. So at least it tells you where the frontier is. So what do we know? Well, this would be a very efficient place to start. More comparative work. The methods. I don't have much time to talk about this, but in the 1930s, what was social science like? It was philosophy. It was normative. A little bit better than Karl Marx in the philosophy out of 1800s, but not too much. Social science was really, the way we know it today, is really a post-World War II phenomenon. And actually a post-World War II plus computers, which take you to the 1970s or so. So very philosophical essays, and people still write philosophy. But by the way, if you want to know how different it is, go to a book of the 1930s and try to read it. It's very difficult. We're not used to that style anymore. Really not, right? Really not. 1960s, it was more the comparison of many essays and cases about what, building institutions in Honduras or Costa Rica or Thailand. One of the famous people, Fred Ricks in Comparative Public Administration, he spent time in Thailand. And you read his stuff, it's very much about cases, right? Trying to make sense, but not having good conceptual distinctions and conceptual analytics that we have today. We have so many great concepts that can help us to understand a problem in policy, which these people just didn't have at the time. And you start to read that, you really say, well, humanity really came really far, And so today we use mixed methods, qualitative and quantitative methods, a combination of both. These are our methods today, and as a scientist, that's what you need to use, right? So here's Fred Riggs. I'm a recipient of the Fred Riggs Award for Lifetime Achievement in Comparative Public Management, I think it's called, Public Administration, from the American Society for Public Administration. And he spent time in Thailand. He was born in China. He also did some work in some other Asian countries. And he was the first one to say that comparison should not only be philosophical, like of the 1930s. You should look empirically what is happening in the context. He called it ecological. Nomothetic means in the specific case. Look at specifically what is happening, because that's where you see the differences. Like I said, with the special authorities in America, until you ask these basic questions, they would not come to you. Right? So he brought that look at the specifics and then try to see how that is relevant for solving problems. You know, how does the king of Thailand solve problems different from a president? Does it make a difference? And again, his work is, by today's standards, it would say it's unfocused, it's all over the place, but this is the tools that people had in that era. So I wrote a book, a chapter, this came out last year or this year, a handbook of research methods in public administration, management, and policy. I sent this chapter, the page proofs anyway, to Danawat. Danawat, these are page proofs. You know, you should not distribute them, but I think students want to see them, right? So there's a chapter on how, sort of a big view of how to do comparative questions in public administration. And in this chapter, I say there are three basic approaches. And I'm going to suggest for your dissertation, you go to the second one. The first one is broad frameworks of comparing countries. Like I said, that was done 10 years ago, 20 years ago, but there's still a market for that for practitioners. And I'll show you an example, like fisheries. You know, if you want some fishery policy in countries, you know, OECD would look at these kinds of things, right? Broad comparisons of policies across countries. You can extend that with some case interviews, best cases, documents, surveys. You can extend it in that way. And I give examples that you can go to in the book that I'll show you also on this slide. More likely, you're going to use a targeted question for a specific problem. How do you solve a particular problem? Now, what is interesting about the comparison definition is that we think about comparison always involving two countries, but it could be, a comparative study could be about one country only if that country was showing us something that was different or important to inform the theory at general. So this is a theory in general. Now let me show you how this place does it. Even though it's not a strict, it's a comparison of this place against the general theory. And a lot of work now in the last couple of years only is starting to take this approach. Instead of making a strict comparison, it's comparing against the theory rather than comparing against another country. And people are using that a lot. And you can use, you know, a survey, or there are a few cases of experiments, single case studies, multi-country, super focused. Every social science method tool is available. But what makes it interesting is what you are focusing on. What is the problem you're solving? It's not the method, it's the problem that you're doing. You're tackling a big problem for humanity. It could be, by the way, a big problem for humanity could be a narrow focus on how to develop better leaders, right? Or how to get children to get a vaccine shot, or how to help women in disempowered societies to open up a bank, to be more independent financially, right? It doesn't mean that you're solving big problems of democracy, okay, that we've been sometimes also talking about. It could be very narrowly focused, right? Okay. And sometimes a third approach is philosophy. Like I said, what is the meaning of democracy? How are different people doing it? And we need more thinking about this, but I don't think I would advise a PhD student this day and age to take this on as a thesis. I think this is a little bit high risk. But thinking about these bigger questions before you do the target, it could be very wise. It might be very wise to spend 3 weeks, 2 weeks or 3 weeks in this broad mindset thing, and then see how that informs your smaller question. And that could be very interesting, right? So I would invite students to maybe spend a couple of weeks or maybe even a couple of months in these broader things, but be focused. Like, how will this inform my specific question, right? So you don't get lost. You know, go everywhere and be lost. You know, you don't want to get lost. This is from the book. It shows these different kinds of things, different examples that applies it to those things. So this is in the book or here, so you can look at these as examples. So if you look at these 12 references, they would show you totally different things, right? Each of them would be totally different. Totally different. Examples: a comparative study of performance-based budgeting in Iran and developed countries. A case of Canada. So comparing performance-based budgeting between Iran and Canada. Why is this interesting? I don't know. The author will have to tell you why it's interesting. I didn't quite read the article, but it caught my eyes. But you have to make the case why it's relevant, right? Correct? I don't know why. Are very narrow. I did work with people when I was in Taiwan, people in Holland and Spain. Since the year 2000, new public governance has become very important. People using more networks, and this is published 5 or 6 years ago. The role of trust. When you're working in networks across different government agencies, right, different bodies, trust. Do you trust this person? Is this person going to be there next month? Are they going to get another job? Are they just being something? Trust is really important to make networks and collaborations work. So we were looking at the role of trust in networks. There were slightly different networks in Taiwan, Holland, and Spain. In Holland, it was about networks for water management, which is issued there. In Taiwan, it was networks around urban regeneration and turning into parks, like taking green space and turning it into parks. In the Spain case, I forget right now, but we had these data. So we collected surveys among people participating in different networks to find out how this trust works. We really narrowly focus on this question of trust. Maybe not a great practical, well, it wasn't practical relevance, but the article doesn't draw out the practical implications. But there are ways in which practitioners can create trust, you know? Like picking up your phone or, you know, answering your email, you know? That sort of helps. Anyway, so very narrow and targeted. But it's an example. I just gave a presentation last week or 2 weeks ago at the American Society for Public Administration, their conference. So I'm looking at strategic management in national government. The national governments have all these problems. I don't know if you can see this, but this is an example of some fishery issues. I think Indonesia, or I think so. And yeah, they have to deal with aquaculture management, the fishing boats, the competitiveness of fishing products, and supervising that. And so, you know, but they have all these different monumental tasks they need to do. And then you see, well, how many people actually work in the fishery department in Indonesia, right? You say, oh, a couple hundred, right? So being strategically focused on what you can do, given your limited capacity, become very important. And there's some frontiers around that I'm working on right now. National governments have always been, they're leading edge. They're often leading local government. So they use strategic management within the program, but the issue now is that countries are facing hundreds of problems that require different ministries to cooperate together. Oh, that's where it breaks down, right? Getting cooperation across ministries. Danawat, that's not only a problem in Thailand, okay? It's a problem in 190 other countries, right? Getting ministries to work together. And
yes,
so
still nowadays, it's still in
exactly,
many countries.
Many countries. And so having cross-cutting national goals expands it from strategic planning within your program to the broader government system. We're looking at that. But all countries are still trying to figure out how to do that. Right now, the method is for the prime minister or for the president, literally in his cabinet, to call the ministers together and say, today, this is the problem. I need you to be working together to solve this particular problem. It's a presidential priority. That is effective in the case of COVID and major crises. But the problem is that it is limited by political agendas. It is limited by political attention and time in office. And there's no way for the president or prime minister to have 200 cross-cutting issues. All of the cases in America and other countries show that at any point in time, a president or prime minister can only handle about 10 such cases at the same time, he and his staff. But it's not the president himself who's doing it, it's the presidential staff. But staff in presidential offices is usually not more than 500 people or so. So the capacity of a national government to handle it cannot only be from the president office staff. There is not enough capacity there in president offices. They have a lot of power, but they don't have the people. So we need new systems of creating strategic management now, going beyond from just the program to cross-cutting issues. And that's where the world is right now, trying to invent that. And I'm looking at the national government between in Indonesia versus Brazil. And that's a good example of two countries that are chosen because they are very similar. Let me first say that few people in Indonesia have ever been to Brazil, and probably nobody in Brazil has ever been to Indonesia except for maybe visiting Bali for a couple of weeks. So these are people that really don't know each other, but by the numbers, these countries have a lot in common. Indonesia came out of a military dictatorship in the late 1990s, in Brazil in the 1980s. So both are emergent or new democracies or late democracies. They have the exact, Brazil is the sixth largest country in the world with a population of 220 million. Indonesia is the fourth largest at 260 million. And by the way, in between that sits Pakistan as the world's fifth largest country, I believe, which, by the way, very few people know, and most people are surprised to know that Pakistan is the world's fifth largest country, right? That tells you something about the knowledge in the world, right? They have the same per capita income, the same education level, which is not particularly very good, and the same level of corruption. So these countries are almost mirror images. And also, you think of Indonesia as an island nation and Brazil as this big country in the middle of the South American continent that is about half the size. But even in that way, they're very similar because much of Brazil you can't get through because it's deep tropical forest. So the way that people get around in Brazil is by airplane, and that's exactly how they get around in Indonesia. Indonesia, you go by airplane because you cannot, because the boat takes too long and there's no road between these islands. And in Brazil, you take an airplane because it's too far and it's through the forest. So very similar consequence, very similar. One of the interesting differences, though, is that in Indonesia, they have passed many rules and laws for about 20 years to promote performance management and logic models. And they have a Ministry of Administrative Reforms. That Brazil does not have. In Brazil, administrative modernization goes through the Ministry of Economy. So they have an office within, a unit within the Ministry of Economy rather than a separate ministry. It doesn't have the same status. And you see the interest. So this is using performance management across programs in 11 ministries that we identified. We went through the budget list, I think, we identified 800 program directors in Indonesia and in Brazil. So literally, who directs the programs to know whether they would use strategic management. And so this is Indonesia. 4 is agree, 5 is strongly agree. So almost everybody agrees or strongly agrees in Indonesia that they use performance management, but not in Brazil. Many programs don't. Maybe only, look like maybe 30% or so agree. Because they don't have the same, they don't have a ministry there, and they haven't been pushing these kinds of regulations. It doesn't mean that they do performance management very well in Indonesia, but at least they do it, something to build on, right? But in Brazil, they don't have that. And the cross-cutting, the president really does do that. And so, half say they do, other half say we don't. But in Brazil, look, nobody does cross-cutting. There's no cooperation. So we just got these data, and it'll take a year or something before something is written up, right? But it shows you, I'm taking on some big issues, right? Being able to cross-cutting in strategic management means that a national government is able to deal with 200 complex issues facing the country. What this is showing is that the world's 4th and 6th largest country are not even close. The best they can do in Indonesia is the president identifying 10 issues or so. So you ask me, what is a big issue? It's like we need to focus on the strategic roles of national government. Difficult to do. I can see, don't know what looking, oh man, we cannot do this in Thailand. No, you may not. So you go. So There are all these issues in the world, and not every issue is for you, right? Correct? So just find one issue that is, right? So I'm just giving an example. Similar case, a different case, I discussed that. Sometimes it's just a single thing, right? So somebody wrote articles on health service delivery in Bangladesh is becoming internationally famous. They have rural conditions, very poor country, and they're creating local partnerships, community-based partnerships for delivering all kinds of health services in Bangladesh, low cost. Fantastic. A model for the rest of the world. And by the way, you're not going to get this out of America or England because they don't have that condition there. The extreme poverty and rural and stuff. They don't have that. So you ask the question, what can the world learn from my country? It might come in surprising things. By the way, in this case, this is also led by scholars, Bangladeshi scholars in Australia. It's often the outsiders who see how valuable something is rather than the people of their own country. They don't think it's as important. But it takes a scholar, somebody else to see this is really unique. This is really important. In China, I did a study on, this is about different cities working together to solve environmental pollution. But because China has such a top-down centralized system, right? They can have provinces mandate that cities clean up the environment. Wow, and that works. Now the whole world has pollution in other cities, but so it shows the benefit of having some centralized power that can force cities to deal on their pollution. I'm not saying that everybody should become a one-party system like China, okay? But the idea of giving some power to a higher level authority to specifically focus on a specific problem at lower levels and have the authority to push people to work together seems necessary in democracy. Otherwise, the mayors will not listen to each other. They won't be focused on it. So we learned from China some valuable lessons. And we did that. I also, in Indonesia, I worked with the Ministry of Administrative Reform. They have a program to help mid-level and larger cities to use performance management. Performance management allows you to focus on what is a target that we really want to hit. What have we been focusing? What do we want to get more focused on things? It's a very good system. And you can do cross-cutting models for creative tourism, so on and so forth. What they did, they created a multifaceted approach to help cities and help educate and incentivize cities to use performance management. So each city had to decide how, in what area they would use it. So it wasn't the central government dictating, you must do this, you must do that, you must do that. No. The central government only said, if you want to continue getting money on certain programs, then you have to show that you have the capacity to use performance management. So you choose what area you want to do it. After all, they are mayors, right? This is not, Indonesia is a democracy. How can a central government tell the mayor what to do, right? But they can make these conditions. So I actually took this picture pre-COVID of a meeting in the regional area of Indonesia. Of about 700 local government officials, all program directors, learning over 4 days how to apply performance management to their program. They had breakout groups and stuff like so. And they do this twice a year in different places around Indonesia. So you had the national government bringing local government officials below the mayor level to learn about performance management. The mayors welcomed that. But think about it, when I show this to people in Brazil, say, wow, that would make such an impact over 2 or 3 years. They also audited the cities once a year to see how much they were using it. They would get a letter grade, and if they could come to Jakarta and get consulting for a particular project. So here was the theory that we developed, and then these people from Bangi came here to how to develop a tourism model that's supported by the mayor. This is what we want to focus on. Okay, so the ministry would help the city to give guidance what to do without dictating. They really learned that fine line between, we're not going to tell you what to do. We'll tell you have to do it, but you have to figure out what to do. Very, very, I didn't see this anywhere else in the world. Nowhere. And nobody knows about this. Why? Because they are government officials, they don't publish. He was the leader of this, worked on this for 10 years. He's been promoted to be the head of all inspector generals now of Indonesia. So it's going on, and I don't know what happened to the program, but governments do really interesting things that nobody talk about. Right? So comparative public management take you in that space too. And you can, we did surveys and case studies, survey, quantitative data, make a very complex model, but it showed that these things work indirectly to hit the right spots in local government, to really show that this really worked, provide evidence for that. The article just came out in PAR, done what? It is online. These are page proofs I got this week. So the article itself is just in manuscript form. It's from a student, a Vietnamese student that I had in New Zealand. She works at the Vietnamese National Academy of Public Administration. She's just a lecturer at Thang Tu. She was interested in leadership. And we started about 5 years ago. And the problem that she was having, that we're working on, is that people start to work in government and then they get burned out. They want to make a difference, but the work that they're given has nothing to do with making a difference. And she focused on leadership, want to focus on leadership. And the literature until today says how wonderful transformational leadership is. But when I ask people, have you ever experienced transformational leadership? They start to smile. Like, Danawat, have you ever experienced transformational leadership?
Good question.
No. In Asia in particular, we experience transactional leadership.
Right.
Transactional leadership is held in low esteem, right? Many concerns that demotivate, but we said if it's going to happen, it'll be through transformation, through transactional leadership, and I believe that it should be theoretically and practically possible to bring public value motivation through transactional leadership. I don't see a problem with that. I can talk to you. What is your job? And part of your job is to make the community better, or citizens better, or students better, and I'm going to evaluate you on how well they are made better. And it's fantastic, right? Because that's why you joined. So what's the problem? I've never seen a problem with that. So we decided to make that into a dissertation to advance knowledge, to saying transactional leadership in the public sector can be enriched by a focus on public values. So this is a huge problem. Maybe it's not a national problem, but for the 3 million civil servants or 10 million civil servants who get burned out because they have bosses that don't inspire them to make a difference to the community, this is a huge deal, right? People join the public service for many reasons, because they have job security, salary, but they also want to make a difference. So this deals with that particular aspect of people wanting to make a difference and do it, and maybe I would say culturally appropriate for the style, right? So you say, really? So the culture in Asia is very transactional. But I must tell you, when I ask Americans, have they seen transformational leadership? They haven't seen it either, okay? So actually, it turns out that we think other places have it, that we are bad because we don't have it, but that nobody has it. It happens every now and then, okay? Anyway, I know that I'm almost out of time, but I just wanted to show you some recent examples. So you can see it's all kinds of methodologies all over the place. It's really about working on a topic that matters, that affects a lot of people one way or another, right? And wherever you can find it. But look at this group that eventually authored this. I put her as first from Vietnam. I'm in Brazil. Jeff was my colleague in New Zealand. He's a methodologist in Brazil. Magna is an Indian scholar at Texas. And Jeanette Taylor, who is Australian, who recently retired from her university, but has affiliation in Korea. And this is a topic that is relevant to Thailand and Pakistan. How do you think when we work together, like we're talking today? This is the world and the opportunity that we have. And this is what scholars are doing. We're finding a topic. I don't have so much time. I take 2-3 topics at a time. I talk to students. I want to know, Ikra, what you want to study. Pongpun, I want to know what you want to study. It's up to you to reach out. We get an email from you, Berman, thank you for your presentation. You may not remember me, but 2 years later or 2 months later, right? But can we talk? I'm thinking about doing this, I'd like to share with you my ideas. It's a ping pong. It's not only me giving to you. Next time you give back, you tell me what's on your mind. As a human being, what else do we have? You're important. What you want to do is important. You don't want to waste your life. So tell me what is important for you. It's probably going to be important. Probably something that I never thought about. But, you know, make a difference. This is a single country. It was sort of interesting. We got comments back from reviewers. They say, you know, public value, Vietnam is a communist country. Explain to that. So in this article, what you can download from the website is in the discussion section a paragraph that says how the study results from Vietnam are relevant to other countries. And I suggest that you read that. Look at the language that is used in this article or other articles, because when you write on Thailand or Pakistan, you're going to have to argue that the results from Pakistan are relevant to other countries. Because this is where we are. If you want to publish from Thailand, you'll have to argue that these Thai results are relevant for other countries, and you will find a way to do that. Not by pointing out the differences, of course, but by pointing out the similarities. Guess what? In Pakistan, they don't have two heads. They have one head, okay? And in Pakistan, just like in your country, they also believe in public service. And like in your country, they also have problems of this and this. Therefore, you know, based on known characteristics, this study is relevant to other settings. But of course, we do call for further study and replication in other settings as well. This is the kind of argument that today need to be made. Maybe we don't need to make it 10 years from now. But this is where we are today. So this is the talk of my presentation, and I'm now out of time, was about, you know, what does it look like today? This is for the master's students. You can get a PowerPoint, you can read that. Here's the outline from OECD study on fisheries, a general framework. These are the factors that we're looking at for solving the problem, and this is how these countries do that. It's about fishery. By the way, Czech Republic doesn't have an ocean, but they have aquaculture. Okay, surprise! You don't need to have an ocean in order to do fisheries. This is my personal story. I was in New Orleans, as I said, during Hurricane Katrina. The world had never seen that before, and I just want to point out how fast we came. This was 2005, so this is about 20 years ago, not even 20 years ago. Today, the playbook for natural disaster, every country has it, right? 18 years ago, nobody had it. 18 years ago, the Mexicans wanted to help Katrina before George Bush realized it was actually part of North America. So how fast we have learned is my point. And people make wrong idea. I happened to be in Taiwan then some years later, about 7 years later, and I got a visit from the Japan Local Government Emergency Association. And I showed them this figure then. So this is about 10 years ago now. And this is the size of Japan according to the scale of America. And when I did this, only then did they understand, despite all the news reporting, right? All the news, CNN, all the news, only then did they get the point how big this hurricane was, that this hurricane is half the size of all of Japan. Oh. So it goes to show that even despite the news reporting, people often don't have good ideas until you actually get into the detail. For that, Fred Ricks was very correct in the 1960s. You've got to get into the details. And we learned so many things that the scientists didn't know about how to get people back to work. I know I'm running out of time, but they are the ones who invented the idea of giving everybody a free trailer so they can get back to their house. People can't fix their house if they're not near their house. And they need somewhere safe. And if they're not near their house, the children can't go back to school. And they also learned that people can't fix their house until children go back to school. It turned out that one of the biggest things about fixing up your home, by the way, when so many homes are damaged, there are not enough carpenters to go around, right? Is that the children must go back to school. Again, a critical issue. The other thing that people didn't talk about 1,800 people died, but 40,000 animals died. This cat came to us 3 weeks later. She somehow survived. She's still with us today. She's 18 years old. She's been from Louisiana to Taiwan to New Zealand to Brazil. She's a very well-vaccinated cat, by the way. But, you know, animal safety. This was our home after the storm, and what you don't see was that all the roof tiles were gone and like so. But things recovered. This was 2 years later. So you get into the details. The details matter in the details, right? So you need to have some conversations with people on Zoom or whatever. Tell me about your program. How do you solve this? How do you solve that? How do you do this exactly? And you won't get that from just reading articles from other people's research, right? And today with Zoom, you have no excuse. You send people an email. So this is about the method of public administration, right? Of comparative studies, getting into that. So I'll leave it at that. Again, this is probably a key slide for PhD students. Finding the topic is really the key issue. And to think and give yourself 3 or 4 months to find a topic, because it's not easy. It really, you got to try and can you get the data, all kinds of, scientists are problem solvers. You've got to solve the problem about how you're going to get your data, how you will interview. But a lot of these days you can do from your bedroom with a virtual background. And after you figure out the topic, then you make your framework, you get data, you analyze, and you write. And as I said, a comparative public administration could be a single country where you compare these facts against the theory. Right? So that is my story. I know we're out of time, but I'm glad to take a few questions if you have any.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Berman. And well, I think that's a very insightful and inspiring and very practical lecture. But now I think it's time for Q&A. So if you have any questions, well, I had one, okay, from the comment box. But if you would like to ask him for the final maybe a word before we end tonight's session, please feel free. This is your golden chance. You can type if you want. You can type. You can raise your hand. Unmute your microphone. No questions? Well, I believe that. Okay, yes, there is one person. Kun Pongpan, please.
So I would like to ask you that what are the critical factors to do this kind of this study to concern or to be careful?
I think the critical factor is finding, especially for today, I think it's finding the right topic, a topic that is doable. Let me put it this way: the best PhD thesis is a thesis that is done, but it's complete. That's the best PhD thesis. I think Dunno will agree with that, right? And so the job of the PhD student or being a researcher in general is to be able to come up with possible ideas. And you should always be able to come up with possible ideas, even after you get your PhD, right? And when you research elsewhere or you work in a job, you must be able to come up with many ideas. So I think you should be able to come up with 3 or 4 possible ideas that will all be making a good contribution to society, right? And just choose one. Your job is to contribute to society, something that you're passionate about, but you should be passionate about multiple things, right? Maybe a certain area. So I think that's the number one thing, is finding the topic and realize that most people fail their PhD because they never come up with a good topic. Finding a good topic will take you down a mental psychology path of yourself. All your fears, all your worst concerns will come out in this search process for a topic. How do I find data? Do I have analytical skills? You will become aware of what you need to do, and this will show your creativity to solve problems, to overcome the problems. Scientists are problem solvers. If you want an easy life, don't become a scientist, because scientists we solve problems. If you don't like problems, then wrong job, right? Pung Pung, is that a good answer? Yeah, does it help? So finding the topic is the number one thing. I think parallel with that, acquiring statistical skills or qualitative skills along the way, because you will need them, right? So building those skills, but the best way to master a skill is actually to use the skill, right? So you can learn about the skill, but until you use the skill, right? So So I think, that then comes to mind too. So, but the number one task right now that you have is finding the topic. And then the advisor that you have is very critical to help you to say this can be done or that can't be done, or have you thought about this, or I read this article. Just bring something to your life that increases the information. So in that regard also, I think students, PhD students are probably most successful in programs where they talk to each other, like make a WhatsApp group among students. If you can't see each other because of COVID, then at least get online, share each other's experiences and your frustrations. At the end of the day, I think students help each other as much as you get from your supervisor. You're not an island, so it's very much a collective enterprise. Today, I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say like 95% of all articles in our field are co-authored. Meaning right. two or more. I just showed you one of the 6 authors. Nobody has enough time, nobody has enough knowledge, nobody has enough skills to do it alone. The dissertation will have your name on it, but don't for a minute think that you are the only person who had input in your dissertation. And I have not seen a single dissertation that does not thank their supervisor, their parents, the whole list of people, right? And there's a good reason for it, and it's really heartfelt. It's not because, everybody needs to thank somebody. No, it's really because you really know that there's a lot of love and that's being shown to you to want to help you to succeed.
Right. Yeah, totally agree. I think Professor Berman is, from my experience, he's one of the most productive scholars in the world that I have met. Productive and efficient. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. I hope we have a chance to think about the next project together, or just sharing what you're doing. We don't always have to do together. It's a sharing. Today is a lot of sharing. There's not enough time. You can only commit yourself to a few projects at a time. But you want to know about many projects, what other people are doing, because you all share, So don't know whether we can talk, We may not be working on a project together, but he'll talk to me what he's doing, and I learned something about Thailand. Like, I'll share with him what I'm doing, and he'll learn something, and maybe it's useful, maybe it's not. You got to have the time to
definitely
take the time, just talk, and
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So, are there any more questions from the floor? Okay. Yes. I think maybe we would end this session because there's no more question. And if you want to share, your ideas with Professor Berman later, I can perhaps just, try to organize a small group, and, I can also share my, own ideas and, perspective, research paper, and you can also share, your ideas of doing dissertation later, like a small roundtable. But today, at least, I'm sure that we have learned a lot from one of the most productive scholars in the world that I have met. Okay, so please, all of us, give a big round of applause to Professor Ivan Berman. You can just, use this.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for the invitation. If Danawat had not invited me, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to share with you. I hope you will share at some point in the past. Danawat, by the way, I'm going to tell your students a little secret. Danawat is one of the smartest young scientists that I've known in Thailand over the last 10 years.
Thank you very much.
He really is.
Thank you very much.
Keep an eye on
look
him.
forward.
Keep an eye. This man's going to go really far.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, one last thing. Our dean, Professor Ploy, she sent a regard to you and all students, but she is sick today. At first, she planned to join us as well, but she just texted me. She's feeling a little bit unwell, so please.
Give her my regards, and we hope that Ploy gets better soon.
Thank you. I will send that message to her. So, again, thank you very much, everyone. Hope we have this kind of atmosphere more and more in our PhD program. And thank you very much, Professor Ivan Berman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
See you again.
Thank you.
See you again.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure meeting you. First time, but not the last time, okay?
Definitely not the last time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.